Well, good evening, good morning, or good afternoon to all of you, wherever you may be. Welcome to Issoria and APAC Global's collaboration, which is the session we are having today on how to support your customers through change. Before we start, just a few housekeeping areas. Do keep your mics muted. We'll be using mostly the chat functions. However, we might reach out to you for comments. And also feel free to raise your hands if you want to speak or, just, join in the conversation, because that's the whole purpose of it today. Just a little bit of introduction. I'm Wong Mei Wai. I'm the founder, CEO, and Chief Change Advisor of APAC Global Advisory, headquartered in Singapore. And my partner in crime here is Ursula Erasmus. She's the senior partner of Issoria, and as you all know, she's actually based in Canada. And then supporting us is Jennifer Menzies from Issoria in UK. And we hope you will have a good session today. So over to you, Ursula.
Thank you, Mei Wai. Thanks for that intro. And yes, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. This is our third collaborative event. And what I have learned working alongside and co-creating with Mei Wai is each time we look at a challenge that is a little bit more challenging, to be honest. And when Mei Wai and I did the last event, we had one participant who actually asked the question, I have a big change, I have an external customer, and how do I actually try and help shift that customer to come along and be aligned with the change that we're working on? So what we're going to be talking about today is how we can, as change practitioners, permeate the boundaries of our own organization and sort of reach through to external parties. So we think about our customers, they could be suppliers, they could be strategic partners that our business works with. And this is true whether you are a family-run business, a small business, or a massive conglomerate, because we know today that being agile for an organization means that everybody who is in the whole system really needs to move in the same direction, hopefully at the same pace, in order to be to progress to where the businesses collectively get the results they want to see. So what I loosely call win-win-win. Collaborations and partnerships do give us the opportunity to be more agile as businesses. And so if we can build support for change within their walls or help them build it within their walls, I think we stand to really benefit a lot more. But we also recognize that it is a challenging task. And my own personal story about this, and when I first had the experience of this, which was really at the time a sort of a mad idea because it was about 15 years ago, I was working as the senior change lead on a massive supply chain project for the biggest grocery retail chain in Canada. And we were trying to change the way our suppliers actually delivered to our stores. And so I'm not a supply chain expert. I didn't do supply chain in my MBA work, etc. But I thought I need to go into the stores and see what is happening. So I spent time at the back of the stores to see how deliveries were received. And what I realized is we could do anything we liked to change that, but unless our suppliers did something different, it really wasn't going to give the results we wanted. So I reached out to our senior vice president of supply chain and I said, I think we should talk to our suppliers. And to be honest, his face was utter shock. He said, why would we do that? They just have to do it the way we want to. And I said, well, I think we need to try and take a more human approach. But I wasn't sure how to do that. So I waited till there was a big supply chain meeting with the suppliers. And I literally snuck into the back of the auditorium where my organization was talking to lots of the suppliers. And I found myself standing next to a gentleman. I introduced myself and he said, "My name is Peter. I am from the Pepsi company." And I said, "Peter, after this meeting, can we have coffee?" And he said, "Yes." So I sat down with him in our internal little cafeteria and I explained to him what I wanted to do. And he said, "That's an amazing idea." So he and I almost secretively started meeting every week where I would tell him, these are the plans. This is how we want deliveries to come to our stores. What does it look like from your side? And we worked like that for about 4 months. And then we set up a meeting where we invited our supply chain executive and his supply chain executive. And we got in a room and we talked about how we were going to make this work together. And it was really phenomenal. No one on either side of the table thought we could do it, but we did. And the lesson there for me is we can permeate boundaries. And it's really important to do that because it saves time, it reduces the stress of change, and it actually allows us to take a much more systemic view of winning together. So that was my first experience of doing that. I know my co-collaborator, Mei Wai, has had a few examples as well. And we're really focusing also today, as we do in our Asia Pac events, is thinking about the cultural aspect too, because it is honestly different in different parts of the world. So Mei Wai, I'm going to start by asking you to share an example with us of where you had to bring change into a customer's environment, whether it was in one team or more holistically. We want to know the whole story.
Thanks, Ursula. I think today, probably many of you will be thinking that we'll be sharing tools or ways that we can support the customers. So you might be quite surprised by my example because my example actually having worked in multinationals, etc., and now being an entrepreneur, we work very much with large family businesses. And we're seeing shifts that are actually happening that allow us to journey as if we are sometimes inside the organization and sometimes outside the organization, but we are actually outside the boundaries. So, Ursula, what happened was that in South Asia, working with owner of a company, as usual, we always get this in Asia, which is that we need to make this happen and it should have been done yesterday, right? And we are ready. We are ready to start the project. And this is what we want, right? The typical, we want revenue, profits, we want market share. Now the project is about to start, and always, we have the tools like change readiness, etc. But in real life, you've got to go with your gut, right? And I asked, could I speak with one more director in the company? And this is something I wanted to share with you all because it made a whole difference. Because when we spoke to that director, we found out more insight into the fact that some of the plans are not ready to make this globalization project successful. And on top of that, in terms of fundings as well, the project might stop at a certain point and then continue again, and this is not how it's done. So to actually pluck out the courage and actually tell the owner of a company that you can't say no, so you have to say very nicely, like, perhaps what I can do is set certain milestones and work with you so your company is more ready. But then they will be saying, but we are ready, and then you have to be very respectful and direct to say, well, actually, you are not quite ready in certain aspects. And then from here, actually, there will be a shock and a silence, right? But at the end of it, a lot of trust was built over this situation. And you can see today we're still working with them, alongside with them, going through the milestones and the change gradually, and have a lot more projects coming on board, because what the owner actually felt was that we actually bother to look beyond our own KPIs and their KPIs, because obviously it's advantageous for us if we get the business. But at the end of it, they don't have that aligned readiness, and the project would have had many hiccups along the way. So particularly in economic situations that might be challenging in certain industries, this is something that we see that shift, that you have to be able in collaboration to actually stop and ensure that you've checked that readiness and alignment, not just for the start of the project, all through the project, and at the points where even whether they are even ready to listen or move on for the future. Yeah, so that's one of my examples, Ursula.
That's an amazing example. And I do have a question for you, Mei Wai, about that director that you spoke to. First of all, my question is, how did you identify that particular person? Did you just have an inkling that there was something not right, or did you actually have evidence in readiness surveys, etc.? So that's my first question. And then my second question is that the fact that the director would tell you that they weren't ready, I find really interesting, because you and I have talked about, cultural aspects of change in different parts of the world, and knowing that quite often in your region, people don't as easily share the bad news, if I can call it that. So can you just speak to that, about your particular interaction? How did you identify that director specifically to talk to? And then how did it actually go?
Because when we first engage with them, you have the owner and the commercial leaders of the organizations who brief on the project, and the IT teams as well, right? So everybody is very driven by the KPIs to move forward. However, just a gut feeling told me, because when I ask questions as well, people scoot around those questions. So I asked to meet a particular director who I know also oversees finance. So I got a chance to talk to him, and from the perspective of understanding, because it's a globalization project as well, I got a chance to ask questions around that and the strategic plan and this and that, and I realized there are many gaps and holes. So he does not directly tell me that he's not ready, but based on our experience, we are able to ascertain that there are gaps, and without those properly in place, you are going to be running as you're changing the wheels. You know where I'm coming from? Yeah. So your project will very likely halt. And also when I ask questions about project budgeting, it doesn't seem to be very thorough. Yeah. So that's where I go back, and typically the approach I take is questioning, asking not in a rude way, like I question you or interrogate you, but I will ask, have you placed this in, have you put this in place? Yeah, correct. Curiosity, which they can't fault you, for being interested to ask the questions culturally. Yeah.
That's so wonderful and really powerful, Mei Wai, because you and I both know also change happens one conversation at a time. And if
Yes.
as a change practitioner, I think in any culture, if you go in and you think about how can I really be curious about what is happening here, my experience is people actually like to talk about what they're working on and how it's going. And, as you said, in that way, you're showing interest, and that curiosity is really about how do we do this better together rather than asking direct questions that might cause someone just to close up. So I really love
Yes.
that. Curious questions are super powerful, and conversations are very important, much more important, in my opinion, than tons of spreadsheets. So that's really interesting, Mei Wai. I think what I'd like to turn our attention to now is kind of that idea of the seamless team. So you talked a little bit about it as, being that outsider, insider. Tell us a little bit more about how that has felt for you in the companies or the situations you've worked where you've been sort of working, permeating boundaries. And then I'll share some of my stories too, which are not based in Asia, unfortunately, but just so that we can learn from each other.
Okay. I think typically what we have done is, particularly in large companies, you go into, say, if you have to develop something together, you go into joint planning sessions in the past. And surprisingly, that still felt very outside and inside. The boundaries are there, right?
Right.
Or whether you do it in a workshop style or in a planning session. So one of the things that I notice is two areas. Firstly, the ways that people manage such boundaries. Sometimes they would say a manager is put in charge for the interface. This partnership, this person will be in charge of this, right? And we actually see that manager is a passe. He's a roadblock. Okay. So what I mean by that, and why we have come up with co-creation models, is that typically when there's any communication coming through, nobody is interested because they've got their full-time work. And then they expect the manager to be running it, managing all that, and then communicating again. But almost every time we've worked with somebody in that model, it's never been optimal. It's because the manager is typically a manager. He plans, he budgets, he resources, he does the typical managerial stuff. He also filters anything that can be out of the box, right? And interprets it in his own way, put his own salt and pepper, we call it, in before they pass it on to the team, right? And there have been situations where the relationship can then be quite negative, and then the senior team has to come together and everything seems fine. Now, the other way that we see actually works much better is that you do a co-creation, and then you know who are the people, who are the key fillers in the company that need to connect. And when they connect, and then they are passionate about that partnership, that's how it works very positively, rather than, going from just managing, we move to co-creation.
I love that. And, from my experience, co-creation does two major shifts. It helps us shift from communicating to educating. So co-creation means that we actually invite people in, which is one of the fundamentals we know of really good change. And the other is moving sort of from just a planning mindset to exploring. So finding different pathways and maybe even finding more opportunity when we co-create. I recall working with a Capgemini team at one point where we were doing this, working across boundaries of organizations. And we also did a co-creation workshop. I mean, it was in the days when people were traveling like crazy. So I don't know I'm trying to think how well it would work virtually, but probably almost anything works virtually. And what they did is they guided us through a process of thinking first about strategy for each organization. And we had an illustrated journey map of the strategy for each organization, from which we were able to create a Venn diagram to see where the strategies of the two companies kind of overlapped to create that alignment at the strategic level first. And obviously there were things that were very different, but in the area that we were working on, we had this really good overlap. And then from that, we were really able to say, now, if that's what we both want, let's co-create how we solve for this problem, how we actually roll it out, all of those things. Do we have even a communication approach that works across both organizations, so that ultimately when the person on this side of the fence works with their sort of co-worker on the other side of the fence, they've heard the same message, they've had the same training, etc. So it was really, really powerful. And I love that you're continuing to do that. Co-creation is one of my favorite approaches in change, because when we start in it together, we usually end well in it together. So for me, that's really, really powerful. And I think that does speak to the seamless team.
Thank you.
The other point, yeah, go ahead, Mei Wai.
Yeah, Ursula, what you were saying also reminded me of something, which was the other week I was very surprised. I was listening to some of the global leads of the top advertising agencies saying that for them to work with clients, they have to start with the brainstorming, and they were talking about it as if it was still very cutting edge. But in fact, right, what many people have actually found is that when you put the teams in the room together to brainstorm, the brainstorm is actually delivers substandard quality or less fresh ideas. Particularly, we know you have groupthink, and it also depends very much on the mood and whether you had a good night's sleep the night before. So that was another area that we see the shift of brainstorming to do planning has moved towards more of exploration, whereby you kind of encourage seeding in ideas. Say two senior teams have to come together to churn out a great idea to move forward in a business. What happens is that you kind of seed that in way before and allow the cross-functional and multifunctional teams to have their own points of views, and it's almost always quite limited to what they know. So you have to cross-function and then elevate that up and then have that facilitated. And for example, if it's a beverage innovation, bring in luxury goods, bring in different kinds of categories to break that out so that you have a lot more fresh ideas. And also what we found was that never rushed after that meeting to say, oh, we've got a great idea, but to sleep over it and then have the senior team then decide again on another day what it could be moving forward that you want to move forward with as in a business idea. Yeah. So just sharing that.
No, that's wonderful. And my follow-on question for that is, in that type of seeding ideas in, because I know that in Asia, organizations are good at that. I've read lots of case studies, and I know that you do a really good job of this in Asia. Do you also bring in sort of what would be, I would say, the ultimate consumer? So let's talk about create a new beverage. Into those kinds of seeding processes, do you bring in the ultimate consumer, and at what point do you bring them in, so that both the manufacturer of the beverage and the either advertising marketing arm or the sales organization and so on sort of understand it from the consumer's point of view? I'm really interested in that.
In fact, it's a very good point, because if two organizations want to come in to collaborate, to innovate, it is ideal to then start it immediately to talk to consumers, but not ideal to spend all your funds up front, but to break it so that you can prepare concepts and test them. And I'm not sure whether he's here. I know someone who's very good at market research who was going to join today, so he might be able to say more than me. But they do things like sandboxing, all the different things, and develop it as it goes down so that it minimizes any risk of failure when you launch, because you are going back in this way to the consumers. Yeah.
So what's interesting for the people who are on this call, and I'm going to try and call it out explicitly, is it may sound like we have moved away from a conversation about change. But in actual fact, change happens across a whole system. So, if we think about pretty much any work that any of us do, there's always an end user. We do stuff for somebody ultimately to either purchase it or utilize it or whatever. And so this idea of sort of working through the whole system in, as you said, Mei Wai, a more exploratory, curious mindset allows, I think, in my opinion, it allows us to get a better solution, and even more important than that, to get all parties, all stakeholders in that whole system excited and ready and sort of pulling their energy in the same direction. So instead of just having the standard project where you've got your change strategy and plan and you execute that, and then fingers crossed, you hope for the best that your customers and suppliers are going to show up to play nice, and then your ultimate consumers are going to make the purchases and so on. So if we really think about the whole system, I think that's the way good change really happens, which means that as a change practitioner, sometimes we have to sort of fight a different fight or go into a different battleground, because whatever you are assigned to, it's about raising your eyes above the horizon and looking beyond your initiative or your program's change plan, and just think about who else is in that whole system. Is there any possible way we can sort of bring them into the way we move this forward? Obviously, also, the earlier the better. So as organizations, I also think when we are doing our lessons learned and debriefs and things on change projects, if we've been very had a very tight focus on how we've managed the change, and we haven't really looked at the whole system, that's a good thing. If you're invited as a change practitioner, that's a really good thing to raise in the lessons learned. What about all the other stakeholders? So, maybe gently you can also help educate your organization to say it's not just about us. I think I would love to ask some of the folks on the call if they have had any experience working through the boundaries of their own organization. So if anyone would like to put your hand up, if you've got something you would like to share, do so, because I'm always interested in what people are doing. Even if you're in the middle of trying to do something like that right now, it'd be great to hear anybody's examples. And Mei Wai, you might know if anyone on here has any examples. You would know some of your colleagues and so on. Okay, Fenna, thank you for bravely putting your hand up. Let's hear what you have to say.
Oh, yes, thank you. I'll go first then.
Okay.
Thank you both for sharing your examples also today. Very helpful. It's always good to learn from others, I think. But maybe as an example that I'm working on currently, but I have been also using this approach a couple of times in the past years, is around very much touches, I think, some of the points you refer to. It's about strategy in multinational that I've been working for a while, and they have in different organizations they, they wanted to bring across the strategy, but more important, they wanted to make the connection between the strategy, the sort of abstract strategy, and what does this really mean for every person deep down in the organization. And one of the I won't maybe call it tools, but it's a sort of a tool we've used or are using now. We call them strategy dialogues, where we involve the leaders and we have leadership really driving this. And they, of course, they get the content and they get a train the trainer session so that they understand also themselves what does this mean, what is this strategy, and but more importantly, that they have a dialogue with their own teams on what that strategy, how to translate it into, let's say, their team goals and even individual goals of each individual person. And then there's a lot of reflection in these dialogues that happens. So we built that in also in the flow, so that people go out in breakout rooms or one-on-one in pairs, and they really discuss. And it has a couple of there are a number of aspects that touch upon its awareness, understanding, but also to a certain extent commitment. That's the sort of change model that we use here, where you see across all of these elements, you see things moving, if you like, and it's really a powerful way, I would say, to almost a bit of a co-creation there to have people bring that strategy close to themselves. And it's sometimes there's resistance also in the system, also by leaders. Every time again, when we've done this, every time leadership teams are like, well, there are tons of questions and reasons why not to do it. But always afterwards, people are really happy and enthusiastic with it, and they really start to understand, and they start also carrying the message. But maybe the link to the system, I really liked that example that you gave about it's always about the whole system. So in the consumer, or in this case, it's multinational with customers, because it's business to business. So we always bring in also customers and end user stories into these dialogues. So even if it's all internal focused, we bring the external element in to make sure that people also start to understand why are we doing this. So there's also a purpose element to it. So
that's wonderful. That's really, thank you, Fenna. Lots of great insights in what you shared. And two things popped up into my head as you were speaking. One is, I think it's pretty universal that leaders always feel this need for speed. And so often the resistance that when you're a change practitioner, you say, oh, I'd like to do this, or I'd recommend this. And they're like, oh, it's too many questions and what have you. I think the anxiety is around speed. If we do this the right way, it's going to slow us down. And in actual fact, if we do it the right way, ultimately it speeds us up and allows us not to have as many roadblocks and resistance. So that's the one thing. And the other thing, which, just in the conversation with Mei Wai, and you reminded me again about this, Fenna, is when we invite people into a dialogue or a conversation, what we are actually doing is indicating to those individuals that we have enormous amount of respect for what they bring. And there is nothing that I have ever come across that builds better trust than showing people we respect what they can contribute. And when people feel that they are respected, the way they actually work changes. So, instead of the brainstorming, which doesn't net us many great ideas, as Mei Wai was illustrating, when people feel really respected, they will bring their A game, and they will also not be shy to really bring their complete out of the box ideas. And so that's to me the power of doing this co-creation and inviting people in is, gosh, I was invited to this meeting. They must know that I have something to offer. It's such a wonderful feeling. I mean, it really does feel good. So, in any ways that we can do this in our change, even if it is within our own walls, reaching out to people in other parts of the organization is really, really important. Thanks, Fenna.
Oh,
Does anyone else have any questions or anything they would like to contribute? Marit. Are you able to unmute yourself, Marit? Let me see if I can unmute you. Teams is sometimes a real beast at the moment. I know that they introduced a new version. Can I unmute you? I could mute you, but I cannot unmute you. That's so weird. That's really a struggle. Jen, are you able to unmute Marit?
I'm actually just looking now, and I don't seem to be able to for some reason.
Okay, Marit, do you want to use the chat function if you've got a question or an anecdote to share? And while Marit's doing that, let's see if anyone else, well, Mei Wai, first of all, I'm going to ask you, did you have anything you wanted to explore further with Fenna, or did you have any comments?
Well, I think what Fennel said is very interesting, and it was very in line with the whole exploration, within the system. The other thing that crossed my mind was also when you all were mentioning about communication, that we tend to always talk about change communication, but in fact, in such situations where you are crossing boundaries, it's probably engagement that's going to be really making that difference, because the communication focuses us on what we want to say and what we want to tell them and who we want to tell within there. But actually, Ursula, when you were talking to the guy in Pepsi, etc., it's very much about listening to the other side, understanding the needs, listening to complaints as well, and then trying to fix those on a very regular basis. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Oh, I see Maret's written something. Yeah.
Yes, so Maret, actually, when I saw Maret holding something up, I don't know if the rest of you saw it, I had a flashback to earlier on when Maret and I used to work together. Some questions that we often used to really get the dialogue going with any party. So this would work also, with your external parties, suppliers, partners, etc. Is once they kind of know, this is what we're thinking, then the questions one can ask is, what is on your mind? What's the real challenge? Because sometimes we assume we know what the Pepsi has as a challenge or the other organization has as a challenge, but we're not inside that organization. So asking them what's the real challenge is a really powerful question. Then we can just ask, what else do you want to share with us? Because who knows, they might be aware of the fact that they're going to be acquired in 3 months' time or something. So the what else is really important. Then asking, what do you want? And of course, this is the true sign of collaboration, because it's not just about us, it's also about you. So what do you want? And that's where that sort of even mental Venn diagram comes together. This is what we want. This is what you want. What is the overlap? What is that space that we could work in? And then what would be most useful? I try to be a really practical person in my working, through the system in change. And I like practical questions. And one of the most practical questions is what would be most useful. I think often in change programs that I've been involved in large companies is we've spent a lot of money and a lot of time building out elaborate PowerPoint decks and playbooks and all kinds of artifacts. But in actual fact, those are not the most useful things. But sometimes what is most useful, people will tell you, is I'd love to sit down and be able to have a fireside chat or listen in to a fireside chat between the leaders of both organizations. So asking what is most useful actually means that we get to the point and deliver what's really going to be helpful for people. So I love those questions. Thanks for bringing them back, Marette. That's really awesome. I love that. Great. And actually what we'll do is we'll share those questions as well in the output. So when we do the summary, we'll share those questions because they are really good questions to use. Mei Wai, what I would also like to ask you in this, so you've talked about the shifts, from sort of, let's say, the traditional way of managing change to these new ideas of aligned readiness, which is absolutely amazing. Engaging, exploring. You did share with me this idea of from standardized to kind of personalized. Can you say something about that shift? Because we haven't really touched on that explicitly.
Okay, so that one links very much to, say you have joint planning sessions, and you're probably very familiar in, say, multinationals with chain stores, etc. And you have to go into joint session, and it's repeated across different channels, right, or partners. And the sessions are run. So that's what I call very standardized. And, linked to it, the whole approach as well becomes very cookie cutter. And it's repeated every year, at the same time, you have to go into that session to develop plans together. So for me, I think that doesn't bring the outcomes because you see managers in the company duplicating their past year's plan and just adjusting. And that's not really what's going to really make that quantum shift in the business or, the sales, etc., right? So what I actually see working better is to actually take a more bespoke and personalized approach, meaning, and it links back to the topic in the sense that you are supporting the other side as well, but in fact, starting from a different point of really looking at your partners and thinking about the current situation and like what Marette's saying, thinking about customers, thinking about all the stakeholders, everything, and the current situation, and start from a clean sheet and actually say, what is it that, we want to do this year? This I'm referring to more like yearly plannings that you have to do in partnership.
I just have to take a deep breath here because this is really close to my heart. And I think the challenge we face in organizations, certainly, I don't know if this is true in the Asia Pac region, but certainly in other parts of the world, what I have seen is a very strong move towards rinse and repeat. And, I am a rebel. Marette knows me a little bit. Mei Wai, you know me a little bit. Everybody else will know I don't necessarily go with what everybody else says is the best thing. And that's why I just take a deep breath when I hear Mei Wai say this, because that's exactly what I believe. I think rinse and repeat gets us into trouble very quickly. It dumbs everything down. Honestly, the world is shifting so quickly. What what our reality was 12 months ago, what our customers' reality was 12 months ago, is not the same as it is today. And so that rinse and repeat model becomes literally a checkbox exercise, in my opinion. But it is so hard to get senior leaders to think about starting from a clean sheet, looking at things differently, ideating before you start a plan, co-creating in that planning. And gosh, I think everybody on this call needs to write a chapter of that book. Let's not rinse and repeat. Let's do bespoke, personalized, because I really think that's important. The world moves so quickly. Rinse and repeat might feel like the speediest way to get things done, but it's probably the speediest way to ensure that at best we plateau in our organizations and the advances we make, and at worst we start falling off the plateau. So I love that you called out that shift, Mei Wai. It's so, so dear to my heart.
And in fact, your point about what's happening in Asia, is this actually happening? I like to say that, in fact, and I dare say this because I think a number of people I've spoken to actually share the same sentiments. We're finding that very often, due to company restructurings, you have safe people in the organization, and then the external experts are more radical or willing to think more boldly or step out of the box. So because you have that safe profile, what we are finding is layers of mid and slightly senior position leaders being very safe.
Mm-hmm.
So how do they start safe? Already as Asian culture, we are very safe. Is let's take out what was done last year and,
Right.
start again. And should we say this? Should we not say this? So once that comes in, you're not going to get very far in any partnership, honestly. You're not going to really make that big progress.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
And as an external who can be more radical and bold, how accepting are those organizations of working with someone like yourself, Mei Wai? Honestly, how hard is it for you to get them to say, let's try something different?
I think first of all, for me, I've learned patience. There are many things on the tip of my tongue, but I have to say at the right time, which links back to what we said also earlier about readiness.
Mm-hmm.
You need to deliver it when they are ready. But I believe listening to people in the organization, and I have been directly told by people to say, I don't understand why the CEO doesn't listen to what we say, but they want to hire people like you to tell us this, I think they are there. They listen. So far, I can't complain about that. They do listen if you say it at the right forum to the right people, and bring it out in a very balanced way. And they are they will be open to change. But the thing is that if you want to get to change in a very impatient manner, no, they will not be ready for that. Yeah.
That's wonderful. When I first started working in Asia and had people in Asia, a team in Asia, I got some advice from a person that I have a lot of respect for, and the way she described it to me is walk alongside those people for enough time that the conversation about difficult things becomes the natural point where you're going to step in. And so I am not a very patient person because I grew up in a culture, especially since I moved to North America, that doesn't put a lot of store in patience. Everything is like go, go, go all the time. And so this is a really good reminder, I think, for any of us who work more in North America, particularly, and thinking about, working with people in other cultures, is patience is really a virtue. I know that's a very old saying, a very old idiom, but if we are patient, as you've described, Mei Wai, and also your other point was about listening really well, then I think you see the timing and those gaps to really have the conversation about that otherwise might feel very difficult for the person on the receiving end, for the audience. So at this
I
point,
see the question from Maret.
yes.
She asked me a question. She said, hi. She says, in North America, we are data obsessed. Is this the same in Asia? I would say yes, in certain companies, people can hide behind data. But then on the other hand, there are some who are still developing. They may not actually do that. But increasingly, I think we have also actually a data expert here. Are you there, gang? Yeah. So anyway,
Yes,
I
yes.
think, yes. So maybe you can answer this question better than me. I feel that people do hide behind data.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so I think it really depends on the companies, right? So I think some of the companies we've seen more on if you are looking at non-multinationals, more smaller, I think a lot of them are still run on gut instincts and also their business senses, not too much data in that sense. Probably a lot of data that you look at is more on the sales aspects, right? Cost, the simpler data. Now, if you look at multinationals, I think they do have quite a wide variety of data, and it really depends on the organization structure, what's the agenda of the different teams, and how they make use of that data. Some they do try, but I think a lot of the issues that we see in terms of change where the conflict arises is maybe when they tend to want to hide certain data, not to actually publish
Yes.
that, and to actually showcase so that they protect their own interests and also push their own agenda. We do see some, but I think it's not that widespread, right? At least from my experience that I see
Yeah, they
working
do
with
know how
organizations.
to. Yeah, they do know how to present data to their advantage. Yes.
Gangli, could I ask a follow-on question? Do you see organizations then taking that more sophisticated data and really turning it into insights? Or is it just sort of taking it at surface value, if you like, and not really thinking about, well, what is the real insight here for us beyond just what the data obviously tells us?
I think most of the use that I've seen has been pretty positive, where they're really trying to generate insights that actually drive like what's the direct of innovation, how can we better design our products and services. We see a lot of good use from that. Not so it's actually a very overwhelmingly positive use compared to just now we talked about some cases where they are trying to kind of protect their own interests. Right, so that's what we see, and yes, there's quite a lot of use, and I think recently with the recent boom in AI and a lot of talks, and AI has been there for the longest time. Right? A lot of companies are more adopting such tools to actually help them in their insights. So I see that as a more positive kind of progress overall.
That's wonderful. And my sense is that you in Asia, you're ahead of us with thinking about insights. And I saw Maret sort of put a follow-on in the chat, is that some sponsors don't want to hear anything other than the numbers. And this is so true. I think the North American focus is really on the numbers and not on the insights. So it's hard to have a conversation about the insights. Many leaders only look at the numbers, and they've got a fixed idea in their head, and it's just like, if this number isn't going up or going down, whatever is supposed to be the right trend, then I'm not interested in anything else, rather than actually saying, so if it isn't going up or if it isn't going down, what is really happening here? And just missing that conversation about the insights. And, all of what we've been talking about today about sort of permeating the borders of our own organization to work with external parties. Data is important for that when we start having this conversation about how are we going to rise together? How are we going to win together? Because we need them to tell us what they are seeing, and we need to say what we're seeing. And therefore, with the insights from sort of both camps or all camps in that whole system, then we can think about what is it that we need to do sort of collectively in making change, emergent change, a reality for all the organizations. Thanks very much for your insights, Gamey. That was interesting. Wonderful. Well, as usually happens, you know, we start these conversations and they just have such a lovely flow, and the questions come and the experience comes and so on. So in the last couple of minutes, Mei Wai, is there anything else that you would like to share with the audience today about this conversation?
Well, yes, definitely. But just a quick one on Maurette's last point here about her presentation tomorrow. I think based on my experience also working with, I'm not sure whether your client is American. Sometimes they are also, and even in Asia, they are also uncomfortable actually with the behavioral parts, the qualitative things, and the softer things. That's why they rush to focus on the numbers. So if you are able to if you are strong in that aspect and you can give them the other aspect, you will see they are actually quite uncomfortable, but they might listen to you. I mean, it's just a suggestion, because I had faced quite a number of leaders who tend to do that. Yeah. So just thank you so much anyway for sharing. Yeah, thank you. So just to wrap up for today, time has really flown by for us, Ursula and everybody. We talked around the topic, but essentially it was around what we can actually do to bring change and support change in partnerships, customers, vendors, etc. And we also talked about the shifts that we saw from traditional to the new, and talked about how culturally we can navigate those. Ursula, do you have any other points that you'd like to summarize?
Absolutely. I think the big takeaway from this conversation for all of us is shifting our own thinking as change practitioners to being more like systems activists. So how we can use the interventions and all our knowledge of change to really activate that whole system, or as many parts of the system as we can, even if we do it in less obvious ways, if we are doing it sort of almost under the radar sometimes. You know, how I started with Pepsi was how I planned to carry on with Pepsi if no one else would listen. But it turned out to be a really good thing. And then my final little humorous story to close off this meeting is I have never drunk Pepsi in my life. And so every time we went to the Pepsi offices for a meeting, on the table, they always had their own drinks.
Okay.
So that's just the humorous part of being involved in a system. You have to be interested whether or not you actually like what they're offering you to drink. Mei Wai, I want to thank you so much. You know, this was great. You and I picked up this question from someone who came to one of the earlier sessions, and I just love to be challenged. So for everybody who is here today, and I know some of you are not in Asia Pac, but that's fine because we all work globally. If there are any ideas you have that you think, gosh, that's something I'd really like to have some expert conversation. And by the way, we're not the only experts, and Mei Wai and I do not know everything, but we like to bring our years of experience into the room. We would love to hear any of the things that you would like to hear in the community. And we really deeply appreciate you showing up, listening in, asking questions, sharing your own examples. It's such a wonderful thing in community when we can learn and grow together. So thank you ever so much from the Issoria side of the table.
Yes.
And I'm
Thank
sure
you. Thank you to Jennifer too, for all her efforts behind the show. Otherwise, it would not happen as well. Thank you.
So we look forward to seeing you all soon. You will definitely receive output from this meeting, and I hope that you join in other community events whenever your agenda allows you to. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.